AFL toolkits, I told you that I'll share with you well in advance. About 2 days ago, I told you that I'll share with you these tools. There are too many AFL tools that can be used in the classroom. This is actually released by the Cambridge University. So I got a link to this PowerPoint presentation when I attended a session through British Council and Cambridge University. I got this PowerPoint presentation. It's a beautiful PPT with plenty of AFL tools. Let me quickly make it a full screen. Yeah, these are all the various AFL tools you can use in your classroom. Devising questions, and then wait time. This is very important. Give them a question and then don't immediately expect children to answer. Give them some time. So we'll go to it one by one. I'm not going to look at all of them. Just probably look at a few AFL tools that you can use during the class time, and not only during the class time, even after the class a lesson is completed. You can use these tools to assess the knowledge or the achievement, whatever the children have achieved, whatever they have learned. You can assess them using these tools. So first is students write questions. You can give them drop questions at the end of the lesson. This week not many people do it, but they can always some children, like we spoke yesterday and day before yesterday, we saw how some students are very timid and shy. They don't come out and ask questions. You can always have a drop box in your classroom, and such shy children can also drop their doubts if they have any, so that paper can be picked up and we can read it the next class and we can clarify their questions. It's a very thing. The second one is also the same. Open-ended questions. Please ensure that you ask questions that have the modal might in it, that will give the children greater opportunity to think and explore beyond the out-of-box thinking. Might generally encourage out-of-box thinking. For example, instead of saying what is democracy, what might be the meaning of democracy, you allow the children the liberty to answer without being in the fear of making mistake. So my question is, what do you think might be the meaning of democracy? Children will come up with different answers. They may or they may not be right, but that's okay. You're giving them the liberty to make mistakes. Wait time. This is a very important thing. I do it a lot in my classroom. When I give a question to a student, I don't expect them to immediately raise their hands and give the answer. I give them a couple of minutes to wait, think. And then I get their responses so that children can collect their thoughts and come up with a good answer. When you immediately call out a student's name, they start to panic and they won't even be able to answer properly. Even if they know the answer, they won't be able to make the sentences or create the sentences properly. So give them some time to think and then give them the opportunity to answer. Open versus closed is very similar to the previous one that we just saw, might. So did you go out last night? Is more a closed question with just a yes or no answer. What did you do after school yesterday is more of an open question. So these are some questions that will encourage children to have abstract thinking skills. Encourage them to talk. Encourage them to elicit, we can elicit more answers from them. So such sort of open-ended questions are very important in the classroom. Exemplar work. This is something that I have been reiterating multiple times over the past 2 days. Whenever I give you a task to do in the breakout room, what do? I give you a template or I give you a sample thing that you can use as a reference and then you can do your work. That is what exemplar is. Exemplar is nothing but an example for reference. Please ensure that you give your students a piece of work or an example for them as a reference whenever they are given a task to do, especially for writing skills. Writing a letter, writing a statistical analysis using data interpretation or using visual data or Q-based data. They're all so new for the children. So always give an exemplar, an example for them to refer to when they are writing such advanced and challenging tasks. Not just for writing skill, even for grammar for that matter, you can give them exemplars. Even for 2 mark question, 3 mark question, and detailed answers. Detailed answer, especially, we have a format, right? 3 paras. It should have a generic introduction. The content must be in the second paragraph, and it should have a generic conclusion. This is how CBSE expects a detailed answer to be written. I hope we all know that, right? Detailed answer, that's how we write. We always have a generic introduction. Introduction should be a quote. For example, education is a life-changing attribute in any person's life, right? Justify this or contemplate on this with reference to the lesson Boli. If this is a detailed answer that's been given to a child must not immediately in the very first para start writing about Boli's story. He or she should first of all start with a very generic statement. Education changes the life of a person for good. We all know that education plays a very important role in developing a student into a multifaceted and a successful person, something of that kind. My beginning sentence should always be generic. And then I go into the lesson Boli. We can see this with reference to the lesson Boli, where the little girl Boli, who was born as Sulekha, had a lot of mental and physical health issues, because of which she was ill treated by not just others, but also her own family members. And then you write the second para, the various instances that happened in Boli's life and how her teacher changed her perspective. All that will come in my second and third para. Finally, I conclude my third paragraph again with a very generic statement. It can either be a quote or it can be again a generic concluding statement. This is how CBSE expects a child to write a detailed answer. Irrespective of whether it is a 4 mark or an 8 mark question, a detailed answer must begin in a generic way and must conclude in a generic way. Now, a child will not understand this at the very first go. So what is our responsibility? I give them an exemplar. I give them a sample question. I tell them this is how a detailed answer should be written and explain to them very clearly. Giving a detailed answer for one question, say this Boli question. The next time when they start writing detailed answer, they will always refer back to the template that you had given to them, the answer that you had given to them. They'll get an idea and they will try to, mirror the same idea. And that's how children learn. Eventually, first 3 times, 4 times, they'll mirror your idea. And then eventually they will start developing their own ideas and they'll be able to beautifully express it in a written way. Exemplar work is very, very crucial and important to guide the children in the right way and also during assessment. Student marking. Huh. So children, peer-to-peer correction. This we saw yesterday. When during AFL session also we saw how exchange correction, peer work, collaborative work, teamwork actually helps them develop that sense of responsibility also. So this is another example of active learning. By taking part in the process of assessment, students gain a deeper understanding of topics. So when I give them the rubrics, I tell them these are 3 key points we expect for an answer. This is a rubric, key point 1, 2, 3. Correct your own paper. Check whether you have these key points. If you have these key points, give yourself 2 marks. Otherwise, reduce half a mark for the lack of each key point. When I give them the responsibility to correct their own paper, mark their own paper, just by teaching them the rubrics, they become self-learners. They will gain a deeper understanding of how an answer is corrected and how they have to write in order to score full marks. This helps them to make more aware of what learning is and thus see their own learning in this way. This is called self-learning. Making aims clear, we do this lesson target setting, teacher review, student review. Again, students review their own learning either in groups or individually. Traffic lights. This is something that we can do, but this we generally use only during online classes. We don't use it in offline, but if you have a card or a placard or something, you can always use this. Red means when you can give these 3 traffic lights to all the students, and this generally works in a classroom of maybe 15 or 20, not in a classroom with 40 students or 35 students. This sort of traffic lights where the children can tell that they are struggling or they are in a middle, they may need some more time to understand or they completely understand. We generally don't use this in our classroom setting where we have 40 students or 35 students. Self-assessment again. 2 stars and a wish. I want you all to please make a note of this. This is a very beautiful way of peer assessment and feedback giving, which we will do in today's session as well. Today, when after completing the lesson plan, we're going to have a peer review of it, and each group will say I divide the class into two breakout rooms. Breakout one, when you present your lesson plan, breakout room two will give feedback to breakout room one, and vice versa. You will give the feedback in 2 stars and a wish model, which means you will tell the other person two good things that they have done in their activity and one thing that they can improve. That's called 2 stars and a wish. You can do this in your classroom also. When you have a group work, and or say a group of small teams, small teams of say 4 students in each group, you can ask the children to do a peer review and ask them to give their feedback in this mode. Two good things and one thing that they can improve. This is something that I use in my classroom. Of course, sometimes children tend to start fighting with this, but it's very interesting, and you involve the students in this, and that becomes a very noisy classroom, but always an interactive classroom. That is one downside to interactive classrooms, right? It becomes noisy, but it's okay. Eventually, they will settle down when they understand what is expected out of them. They will eventually settle down and become more serious. There's a beautiful AFL tool that you can use in your classroom as well. Articulate and then answer. This is very similar to wait and answer. Give them some time, say 2 minutes or 1 minute to think, articulate, brainstorm their ideas, and then give the answer rather than just bluffing whatever they feel like. Generally, children won't be able to come out with proper answers if you don't give them time. This is very similar to the other AFL tool that I saw. No, that we saw, wait and answer. Scene setting. This is also a very interesting thing. Set the scene for the lesson by using a big open question and problem solving task that requires abstract thinking skills. Anticipate responses and follow up so as to work these through. For example, a lesson on the Vietnam War could begin with a question: do Americans think they fight wars or win them? Such an open question. We can also use the same kind of question for No Men Are Foreign. The poem that we have in class 9 talks about war and how futile war is, and nobody wins in a war. There is no winner in a war. So we can ask such sort of a question. Do we have winners in war? Can be a very abstract question that we can give to the students, and we can give them some time to think, and we can then elicit answers from them and eventually go to the poem. There is a beautiful ice breaking activity that we can have in our classroom. I'm not saying use all of them, use as and when you can, and relevant things, use them in your classroom. This is again peer work. Bouncing. This is very interesting one. Bouncing is when you ask one question to say student X. Student X gives me the answer. I again go to student Y and ask him or her, what do you think about student X answer? Student Y gives his opinion, her opinion. I go to student B and call him or her and ask her, what do you think about X and Y's response? This is called bouncing. So this is a beautiful way of involving many children in a communicative classroom. You can use this if you are involved in theater in your school. You can use these AFL tools for your theater classes also. I don't know how many schools have theater as part of your extracurricular activities in your school, but if you do have, please use them. That these activities can be used in theater classes also. Wait and recap. Incorrect discussion. You can use incorrect answers as a point of discussion also. For example, when I ask a question to a child and the child comes up with a wrong answer, I can use that as a point of discussion and ask another student, why do you think he said like this? Why do you think what made him think in this perspective and answer this question like this? This can also be a point of discussion, and a wrong answer need not be chided or need not be ridiculed. We can use a wrong answer as a point of discussion, thereby opening to reasoning and clearing out the misconception. Use the misconception in reasoning to draw the process out into the open. This leads to improving on misconceived reasoning and atmosphere, and in which we decide what is right and what is wrong. That's extremely important. Incorrect answers can also be a beautiful point of discussion in a classroom. Devising questions, challenge common misconceptions, create conflicts, devise questions that challenge common misconceptions. For example, in the case of Boli, where the Boli's mother says she is not beautiful. Anyway, nobody is going to get her married, get married to her. Nobody is going to be willing to marry Boli. Let her at least study. Which girl, educated girl will get married? So let's not send our first 2 or 3 girls to school. Let us send Boli to school, because anyway she's not getting married. Boli's mother said that. So what a weird reason to send a child to school. Please devise questions around those things. Even the things that you feel are very sensitive, it's okay. Let children start thinking in these things. How the children speak and how they look at it and perceive it matters, but never get away from a particular concept because it's sensitive. It's always important that children understand these stereotypes and stigmas that are prevalent in the society, so that they grow beyond it and become more open-minded. The lesson Boli itself is in our syllabus because CBSE wants the children to understand such sort of stigma that are still prevalent in rural India. Maybe not in urban India, but they are still prevalent in rural villages. Children must know it. That's why CBSE has given us these questions and these chapters. So it's okay. Devise questions that challenge the conceptions. Devise questions that create conflicts. Conflicts are not always wrong. Conflicts will in turn result in discussion. And we as teachers, as moderators, we need to ensure that this conflict doesn't end into a conflict, but rather into a constructive discussion. That is the responsibility of us teachers as moderators. We need to moderate the classroom. If there is any ambiguity, explore it and encourage discussion. That's extremely important, especially for 10 and 12 students. Any sort of ambiguity, we see that CBSE question papers also sometimes they are filled with ambiguity. And children struggle when such ambiguous questions come up in CBSE question papers. So let us train them to handle such ambiguity with a clear mind and clarity of thoughts. That can be done only when we do it in the class. So let us devise questions that challenge all the misconceptions. It's okay. Let the children come out of their comfort zone. Even we teachers, let us come out of our comfort zone. Let us talk about these things that create conflict, and then ensure that the conflict doesn't end as a conflict but results in discussions, proper discussions. Let us explore ambiguity and encourage discussion and clarification. It's extremely important for children, because when they grow up and go to jobs, any workplace, they are going to be filled with conflicts and ambiguity on all the sides. How do they deal that? Makes them a successful employee in that organization. And that competency skill, as a teacher, it's my responsibility to imbibe that skill in my children. So please question them, ask them questions that are ambiguous. There's nothing wrong in that. Encourage them to have learning journals. Redrafting, lesson time to redraft work. This allows students time to focus on the feedback. As and when I give them feedback, encourage them to work on the feedback. Key features: when designing writing tasks to go alongside oral work, intend for them to develop and show understanding of the key features of what students have learned. So whenever we have writing skill activity, I always should tell them what is expected out of them, and then get their work. Always give them feedback, constructive feedback, like I told yesterday, and ensure that this becomes a successful written work. So it is a cycle that keeps going on. There are many more, AFL activities that we have over here: group feedback, peer marking, thumbs up. Thumbs up is very similar to that. The red, green, and yellow traffic light revision, teaching collaboration, generate an answer. There are so many things. I wanted to go through all these things and use these AFL as and when you need, and appropriately. Whatever is appropriate for your lesson or poem, you can use them. There are around 72. So I'm going to stop with this because this will then take the entire session. So I'm going to stop with this. Smiley faces. Many beautiful things can happen. So one sentence summary. So I'm going to stop sharing. With this, I'm going to stop this one. I have shared this AFL tools document with you all, PowerPoint presentation on day three or day two, when we were discussing about AFL. So request you to go through them, use these activities in your classroom. I would recommend you all to do that. Move on to today's session, day 4. Our agenda for today is designing lesson plans integrated with the necessary competencies and learning outcomes. Objective: to be able to write and review lesson plans incorporating the development of competencies into the teaching of subject content. So, let's move on. Learning outcomes and key competencies. These are the two main things we need to have in our lesson plan. Our teaching learning activities should have proper learning outcomes. It should have competencies involved in it. Our objective should also have these two ideas in our mind. Two aspects need to be in the teacher's mind when he or she begins to plan a lesson: the subject content to be covered, and then also the competencies which could be developed through the learning activities. The activities we plan should reflect both the LOs as well as the competencies. The teaching activities. What are the teaching activities? Writing. How do I write my teaching learning activities in a classroom? Writing detailed and clear teaching activities is very important. They should firmly link to the intended LOs and the key competencies. So it should be like this. My teaching learning activities should be linked to my LO, and they all should be linked to my competencies. That's how the link should go. My teaching activity should link firmly to the intended LOs, learning outcomes and competencies. Vague or generalized statements will not help us to plan or deliver effective lessons. For example, when I say teach the children metaphors, that is a teaching activity. Discuss and identify metaphors. No, that is not a statement. That is extremely vague. So my teaching activity should be, how do I teach metaphors to my students, or how do I teach poetic devices? How do I teach onomatopoeia? When I say onomatopoeia, what should students understand? How do I teach anaphora, alliteration, repetition, simile? All these poetic devices, how matters a lot. So I need to be very clear on my teaching activity. Vague or just single statements are not sufficient. Learning outcomes do not describe what the learners will do in the lesson. What will describe what the learners will do during the lesson? Our teaching learning activities will describe that. The learning outcomes actually will tell us all the actionable items that they do, what they will have learned at the end of the chapter. For example, know, understand, they will be able to. These are my learning outcomes. My learning outcomes are always verbs, and my LOs should always be in accordance to the Bloom's taxonomy. Ensure that the learning outcomes in my lesson plan are always in link or in connection to the Bloom's taxonomy. So Bloom's taxonomy starts from learning a lower order thinking skill to higher order thinking skill. Ensure that my lesson plan for a particular chapter has both LOT as well as HOT questions. I don't have to just focus only on HOT. LOT are also important. Only with the lower order thinking skill, based on that, can I create my HOTs. I can't completely ignore my LOTs. So please ensure that my learning outcomes are always in sync with my Bloom's taxonomy. The teaching activities describe how the learners will get there, how the learners will achieve the learning outcomes. That is what the teaching activities do. So how do I structure my lesson? Each lesson should have an introductory activity. Like many of you rightly said, Bharati ma'am, and many of you others said very rightly, the introductory activity should be a recap, or it should be consolidating your previous learning. I think Valli ma'am also said the same thing. Assessing the prior knowledge and understanding, that's very important. So recap, whatever you learned the previous day, recap it with an example, with the help of a quiz, a quick quiz or oral questions. And then your introductory activity can also be questions that assess prior knowledge, especially when I'm teaching reported speech or tenses. I need to test the prior knowledge of the children. How much do they know in tenses? How much do they know in reported speech? Or do they even know what subject verb agreement is? I have subject verb agreement in class 10. Have the children even studied about it? Do they even know what a subject is? Do they even know what a verb is? What is that agreement? What is subject verb concord? The children know these things. I have to assess their prior knowledge. My introductory activity can be that as well. An understanding before starting a new topic or skill through brainstorming. Or My intro activity can be introducing a new theme or topic and build a key vocabulary. For example, see, think, and wonder. See, think, and wonder is one assessment for learning AFL tool that I can use, and a teaching learning activity that I can use in my classroom. For example, I show them a placard or a flashcard with a particular picture. I ask them to think about it, and I also ask them to wonder what else can be uh, related to this. For example, let me take a very small example of, say, a placard of a polar bear near ice caps. So when I show them a flashcard with that picture, I want them to see the flashcard. I want them to think about the flashcard and figure out what is present in the picture. And then I want them to wonder what could this flashcard be related to? What is the topic the teacher is going to talk about? This is wondering. With respect to road not taken, I can show them a picture of, say, a forest with two roads diverging. I can show them the picture. I can ask them to see the picture. I can ask them to think about the picture and then wonder what this picture could actually mean. What is a teacher trying to do? This can be an introductory activity that you can do in your classroom before you start the poem or the lesson. Then the main activities of teaching and learning and reading and listening starts. Then after that, I have my plenary. The lesson should always end with a plenary or, after session activity, like encouraging reflection, pose a key question and ask them to ponder about it and come back the next day, or recap of whatever we learned that day. So this is how I structure my lesson plan, and I need to be very cautious about the time I allot for every activity. And any poem or lesson, we can't finish it on a single day. We will obviously take 2 days or 3 days based on the size of the poem or the lesson. So for every day, the lesson plan must have these sort of activities. Different schools will have different formats or templates. Like I told yesterday, it is not the template I'm worried about. It is not the format I'm worried about. It's just the content that I'm worried about. So different schools have different formats that they provide for writing lesson plans. However, the purpose of this exercise is to strengthen our understanding of the key underlying principles which go towards constructing a good plan. Whatever the final format may be, the content is more important. Once this outline plan has been used as a framework for thinking about the lesson, the ideas can then, if necessary, be transferred onto whatever format is required. This process can also be used to adapt existing lesson plans and to integrate the development of competencies into them. That is the reason why I made you to analyze an existing lesson plan yesterday. So no matter what format my lesson plan is, if I'm very clear that a lesson plan should have proper objective or learning outcome, a lesson plan should have proper learning activities, like the three activities: intro, main, and plenary activity. A lesson plan should have competencies. If I'm clear with these principles, irrespective of whichever format the lesson plan is, I will put in my principles into action. That's what matters. There are different sections to a lesson plan. First is my LO, then my assessment content, the lesson activities, time for every activity. What am I going to assess after every activity, during the activity, and identification of the key competencies. These are the 5 sections for my lesson plan. Learning outcome is a summary of the skills and abilities that is intended for the lesson to develop. Whatever is the objective is what learning outcome is. Teaching activities describe very briefly what the teacher will do and say, and also how they will try to increase the interactivity of the lesson. What the learners will be doing, and also how they will be grouped. Either it can be an individual activity, or it can be a pair activity, group activity. This forms the narrative which describes the sequence of activities which will make up the lesson. So that is what my teaching learning activities define. What do the teachers do? What do the students do? Time is the allocation of time for every section. Assessment is something that, I'm sorry about this. We saw about assessment in day 2, not day 6. It's an aspect that we covered on day 2, AFL. We saw about that on day 2. Sorry about this. And key competencies are the 6 key competencies that the attributes, the skills, the life skills, and the behavior that will be developed throughout the lesson.